So this is the first ever recorded Defcon Glasgow. It's the highest tech we've ever been in the last 6-7 years we've been going. So yeah, Joseph's going to give us a talk about, well, what are you going to talk about?
It's going to be called Encryption, a general overview. So, you know, just sort of a shotgun encryption, and maybe you'll learn something, maybe you won't.
So we're going to have that, and then we're going to have a CTF hopefully run by Paul, if it's all working. Maybe. Fair enough. Right, cool. Joseph.
Okie dokie. Alright, welcome to my talk about encryption. Basically, first things, better to start off with, what is encryption? So it's basically, as you can see the definition here, is a method by which any plain text or other type of data is converted from a readable to an encoded version. And it sort of underpins everything that we do in our daily lives these days. I mean, you use your phone, use WhatsApp, use anything, you're using encryption in some way, shape or form. And it's got to the stage where we don't really think about it. So basically, at its core, there's two main types to encryption really. There's symmetrical, which uses one key basically, and it has a lot of advantages. It's, you know, in that, as you can see, it's quick. It's not very resource intensive. It's useful for a large range of messages, but your issue is that you need to know what to do with the key. And when you get to larger numbers of users, say like thousands and millions, because they all have to get given a version of the key, it becomes a lot less secure than it usually is. So asymmetrical encryption actually has been around for a lot less time than symmetrical encryption has. Only in the last, say, 30, 50 years, whereas symmetrical encryption has been going back for millennia. And it was a massive discovery when it came in, and involves two sets of keys. You've effectively got a public key and a private key, and the basic crux of it runs something like it runs on the premise that it's much easier to calculate or to work at one given way than to another. So an easy way to use would be the way RSA operates, which is it uses two very large prime numbers, and it's very easy to calculate what the number will be when you've multiplied them together. But to work out what the two numbers that were multiplied together to get the number is much harder, and so provides quite good encryption on that basis. You can see there's a large number of examples of both. I mean, you've got for God's sake, they're on the wrong side, I've just realised. But actually, AES, DES, Blowfish, RCA, RCS, and RC4, RC5, and RC6 rather are actually symmetrical, and RSA, DSA are actually asymmetrical. They're the wrong way around. Do apologise for that, folks. So yeah, they're both used quite a lot. In fact, so much so that in recent sort of times, especially with the HTTPS protocols and things like that, you've actually find that they're being used together as a sort of hybrid, because you can utilise the fact that, well, they're roughly the same sort of, they offer the same level of protection, but asymmetrical encryption is a lot more intensive in the amount of sort of memory it requires, and therefore it's less efficient. But the two together work as sort of the optimum sort of way of doing things, and so HTTPS protocol has been operating very, very well for quite a long time with them. All sort of cryptographical elements, though, work on sort of the same basic premises that they're, well, at the moment anyway, and that they're basically trying to obscure the relationship between your real message and your encrypted message. And so basic versions, you can see this in sort of like the early versions of the Caesar cipher, which came out about, I think it's 70 BC, something like that. And it's just taking, all it does is it takes one letter and approximates another one in its place. So instead of A, you would have B, and so you just shift along the alphabet. And then you've got diffusion, in which you have to spread your message. And so you've got column transposition. You'd find that in the Scitali cipher, which I'm going to discuss in a second. And the last one is your key secrecy. And basically, it's from history, you generally find it's a bad idea to assume that no one can know how your method works, because throughout history, and even now, you tend to find that people who've devised an encryption methodology think it's the best thing ever, and they kind of overestimate how good it is. Like, no one will ever discover my clever method, but eventually they do, because, you know, when you're determined, you can usually find something out. So, as we move on to the history of encryption. And it's been around quite a long time, actually. I mean, it's sort of the first recorded ones in 1900 BC, and it was used on the Egyptian tombs to sort of kind of as a bit of fun and also to hold information. So it wasn't really a serious thing. But you'll find it in the Kama Sutra as well. There's an element on encryption and how to send love notes to your, paramour of whatever kind. You find it there. Oh, it wasn't really until 800 AD actually that they changed. Because you'll find with the Spartan Scitali cipher, well, they had a stick of certain elements, and you wind your thing around a stick, and you're obfuscating it by all the letters that are on this loop of leather, as you can see. It wasn't until 800 AD, it says BC, I do apologise again, there's another error here. There's Al-Kindi, he's a famous mathematician, he's Arabic. He discovered, and it's actually the biggest discovery until World War II, so that's how big a discovery it was, frequency analysis, which is that certain letters appear a certain number of times, usually, and so some more common than others. So obviously in English, you find E is your most common than A, and you can literally work it out with a large enough base of words. And with that meant that up until 1467, you could pretty much crack any code, really, if you just applied those methodologies to it. And that was the Alberti cipher. And the only reason that was more sort of proof to that is it used multiple letters, and it had a symbol that covered multiple letters, and with that, therefore, you had another level of obfuscation that therefore helped protect it. But to be honest, even after that and with Renaissance stuff, nothing really changed until you get to the 1940s and World War II, when people started using technology to sort of make cryptography became a really big thing, because you're obviously sending messages. The Zimmerman telegram brought America into the war. You find that nations would win and lose based on their intel. And so cryptography sort of took off then, but realistically, this entire time I'm talking about, the only encryption you had was symmetric encryption. They'd never heard of asymmetric encryption; it just wasn't a thing. And so the 1970s is really when cryptography became a standardized element with DES, which is data encryption standards. And it's basically when the NSB, or NSA sort of, it's now called the NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. They demanded that they had a standard, and they called anybody to submit what they had, and they came up with an actual standard as to how they were going to encrypt stuff and use it for all their state communiques. And obviously, once the Americans took it on, a lot of other countries sort of took it on. Now it's sort of like a global standard that a lot of people use. And it was great. It worked really, really well. It did its job perfectly, but it was only, even at the time, it had criticism because it only had 56 bits as its key, which meant it was really quite small and could be brute forced. A lot of people suspected that it could be brute forced at the time, and every state denied it. But there's the Diffie-Hellman methodology of doing things, which has kind of moved on to how asymmetric encryption works. When they developed their stuff in the 70s, it turns out GCHQ had already developed theirs beforehand. So they definitely could crack DES encryption. There was no secret to anyone, really, if you were like a state agency. But it was really, really useful for a lot of items, and it's now produced a proper standard for how things work. So moving on to state of play today. We're still kind of heavily key-based, actually. We've not advanced as much as people think. We still use... AES is the standard that a lot of people use. I mean, I know you can use a large number of other ones, like Twofish and various other ones, but the adopted one that is used in all communiques, mainly because it can be used everywhere, is AES usually. And it's still just a block cipher, a symmetric block cipher, that runs on a key that you then process to such a large degree that it's almost impossible for someone to crack. But we have got widespread encryption standards now, and the advantage of them is we're not relying on people's basically not knowing how our cipher works. They know exactly how it works. We're relying on technology and the ability of technology to out-process us, and for the processing to be very difficult to unravel. And so this technological methodology is sort of is continuing, as we'll see in later slides. But asymmetric encryption is still one of the biggest discoveries, in that you use effectively a public key and a private key. And so one is publicly disseminated and the other one private, and you can use either one to achieve decryption or an encryption. And it solves a large number of the problems of how you successfully get your key to the other person. Because obviously if the key gets intercepted, then even though they can read it, anyone else can read it as well. So Cisco has a number of ratings for currently where they think all the methodologies that we use at the moment are going to be. Do you think I can get away with switching to... I've just kept on here really. Yeah, that's good. And so this is Cisco's estimation of the various different encryption methodologies. So they label things as avoid if they're already hopelessly out of date. So you've got a DES, which is avoid because it's only 56. Now there was an attempt for a while to carry on with DES encryption with 3 DES, which is effectively just your 56-bit item 3 times, and so that would ideally give you 168 bits. But they found actually with man-in-the-middle attacks and stuff, you can reduce that to 112, and it's still ultimately just about crackable. So you can see their alternative is to use advanced encryption standard, which is what they picked. And then you can see there's a variety of modes you'll find with the advanced encryption standard and data encryption standard, and some of them are a lot better than others. So if anything that's labeled NGE, so if I draw your attention to the GCM mode of it, that basically means they reckon it will last for another 20 years or so before technology overtakes it, and we're going to have to get something else. And so there's a number of them that are like that. So you can see SHA-384, ECDH, which is the Diffie-Hellman methodology, and runs on elliptical curves, but it's quite complicated, so we won't get into it. So you can see that there's a large number of choices you have, but we're going to follow on with AES encryption v DES encryption. Where basically in 1997 it was clear that DES encryption wasn't going to do the job because it was too weak, and so they called together a huge number of people, anyone who thought they were good enough, really, to build something that was better. And so you can see that if I one sec. You can see that the stats are a lot better, but basically the methodologies they went for were with the design were submitted to a large number of people. So actually, if I just forward on to this one, so slow. A large number of companies submitted. So you can see IBM submitted. At the bottom here, you can see there were 15 contenders originally, and they were all considered to be really good. But there were 5 who sort of got kept on to the final element. And the way they decided, they didn't really have a specific set of standards because they didn't want anyone to call them out on doubling back and stuff. And you'll see that Serpent actually, it could have been AES's sort of replacement. It could have been exactly what AES was, apart from the fact that they didn't seem to like it. It's really it just came down to personal preference. But there were a number of them that failed pretty solidly. Like Mars is great, but it takes a huge amount of time to implement, and it's really, really complicated. So that one fell by the wayside. And then you have RC6, which is it requires a multiplier, so it's quite it takes a lot of silicon. It's hard on ASIC and FPGA, which means it basically uses a lot of silicon space. And they're the same problem with Twofish with their these S boxes that they chose. And so basically Rindile, which is AES now, it only won because it's not the best at anything. For example, RC6 outperforms it on all Windows-based products. but it's the best on all platforms as well. Like it's like a duck, something swim better than a duck, some things fly better than a duck, some things walk better than a duck, but a duck does all of them, and it does them all okay. Which is pretty much why AES was chosen. A lot of people, some people seem to bring up security issues about it, and there were a number of theoretical ones, sideline ones that were found, but they're actually not for AES encryption. They're for how it's implemented, and so realistically, if you're asking whether AES encryption is good enough, right, yeah, it's it basically remains secure. Basically, it's ridiculously difficult to crack. It takes a very long time, and they expect it to be good for another 20 years. In that, it's basically this is how it works. All it does, it's quite simple actually. It takes your key and it expands it to the appropriate number of bits, effectively, and then it adds another key. And then it substitutes with these tables that it has, and that's one of the reasons why people think now that Serpent is actually better than AES encryption, because it doesn't use these tables, and so Serpent's kind of easier to implement in some areas now. And then what it does is it shifts the rows along, mixes the columns, and then it rinses and repeats it. And so the only difference you'll find between AES 256 and AES 128, for example, is just 4 more goes around the merry-go-round. Literally, so one does it 13 times and one does it 9 times, and just doing this thing literally. And so these tables it has, basically the keys will translate whatever you've sent in. Say I don't know, my breakfast was porridge, and it'll translate it to add a number of numbers and letters. So you end up with your first digit maybe end up being, I don't know, H3, and then I'll have these tables saying H3 then corresponds to S9 or whatever it is, and it will just shift along these tables continuously until it's very, very, very difficult to extricate it again without the key. And so once it's gone through all these things, it becomes a very, very solid cipher. But you'll find that the reason why they stop at 256 and 13 times around is because you actually find that between 128 and 256 you've got a 40% lack of reduction in speed and efficiency. So it just starts to become a massive overhead, and you really always, one of the key things you'll find with encryption is just trying to work out functionality against security, because obviously if it's not usable, then it's not a security measure at all, is it really? No one will use it. Yeah. So basically, AES is a standard that we use currently all the time, but it probably won't be in the future. With a large number of things we'll be moving into. Basically, I've taken this group of items from. They asked a large number of developers and security experts what they thought the newest things will be and what will be coming up in the next 10 to 20 years. And so there are a large group of them that were asked, and they all came up with roughly the same sort of things, as people want to do. And so one of the things they think will kind of come in with encryption is, again, some of these are more theoretical than others. Some of them are kind of here, and some of them aren't. But homomorphic encryption, the idea is that it will never ever be unencrypted, ever. So you never have to decrypt whatever you've got. It will just be encrypted forever. And it'll be sort of like the easiest way to explain it, as I understand it anyway, is, okay, imagine, those boxes you have where you have the gloves and you do your science experiments and everything like that in there, and the items happen, but nothing ever leaves the box. So you only have interaction in there, things change state, things move, things do things, but nothing ever leaves. That is how it's supposed to work. Now obviously there's a large number of things they need to address with that, because it's quite hard to do. Because the recognition of what a given key is, a given item is, in its encrypted state is still kind of beyond where we are currently. But there's 2 institutes that are currently working on it quite hard actually, and they say they're going to have results within the next 5 years. So we'll see if that's the case or not. But anyway, it's something to look out for. The second one is, it's actually here now, but for some reason the financial industry doesn't seem to be taking it up very much. Hardware-based whole disk encryption. The idea is that you can encrypt it to such a level that it's unusable without the key. And it's particularly would be of use in the getting rid of disks. Because currently, if even 1 terabyte, getting rid of a disk, the standards required for it are to basically wipe it 3 times, which takes hours and hours and hours per disk. And obviously, if you've got hundreds of disks to do, it's a massive pain. Whereas this, what it would be is it would just be you deleting the key, which takes seconds, and therefore everything on there will become useless, and it will save you a lot of time and money because you can give it to someone else and they can do whatever they want with it. Doesn't matter what was on it before because they'll just end up deleting over it when they use it. So the next thing is also quite laudable, but I don't know if it's going to happen. It's very much going to be a product of platforms as a service. So we're talking like Amazon and Google, everything like that. And the idea is moving target defense. And so the idea would be, because you can have so much redundancy now with cloud technologies, you could have something running on ISS and Amazon Web Services, but then move it so that the next day it's running on Apache with another front end. And it makes it so hard for people to sort of get a grip on how they're going to approach cracking your system, because they've got no sort of flat surface to land on, as it were, that you'll be absolutely safe from all attacks. It's currently worked on by one team, it's a few teams, but one in particular in America. They don't seem to have got anywhere, or they just said something, you know. But anyway, it's expected to come in the future. It's definitely entirely possible because the amount of money you need to put into it, basically, to have multiple different systems constantly evolving to stop people being able to attack you. Now, number 4 is sort of with us already. It's just wearable 2-factor authentication. So, you know, it's sort of like Pebble or some other watch or something like that. And it's just the idea being that you need to be next to it. And so we kind of already have it. So, it's, you know, the future is here now. It's very useful for industry, but you know it's not as cool as some of the other ones. And so the other one would be resurgence of physical-based security, and you're finding actually there's a bit of research with this in cryptocurrencies, in that a lot of people using, well, not a lot of people, but there's a rise in the number of people using hardware-based wallets for their cryptocurrencies, because they're much harder to crack into. And you know, if you've got like, you know, 1,000 Bitcoin, you can afford it. So there seems to be a rise in people at the high end anyway, but are buying them because I don't know how expensive they are, but I'd imagine they're a little bit pricey. Quantum cryptography is very interesting. A lot of people have been putting a lot of effort into this because a lot of people, you'll see a bit further down, they sort of live in fear of quantum computing being able to crack their systems, but also a lot of people expect quantum cryptography. It sort of operates on, best way to explain it is the Heisenberg principle. The idea that by looking at something or interacting with it, you're changing it. And so it fires light photons, and it's strongly considered to be one of the ways that encryption will go. It fires light photons and it can go very large distance, obviously, to send information. But if someone were to interact with it, that would break the connection, and therefore it would be useless because no information would end up being sent to them. You can't understand what it is from the photons themselves. So that in and of itself makes it very, very difficult to crack, because obviously as soon as you interact with it, it stops. So they, you know, obviously a lot of people working quite hard on that. So you've got smart contracts for encrypted payments, which is, if I recall, basically it's with the use of blockchain technology is basically what we're talking about here, and a lot of people, it's becoming more and more apparent that blockchain technology is going to overtake a large number of transactional methods, particularly things like what's called Western Union and things like that, which are ridiculously unstable, unsafe. You can send money of all sorts to other people, and it's very, very, very difficult to crack into. And so, to be honest, that one's fairly certain to become a thing of the future. All right, last five here. Sorry. Honey encryption is based. It's based on a common theme you'll get in cybersecurity. When someone's trying to crack into your system, obviously, one of the things you can do is you can have a honeypot, which looks like what they're looking for. So they try and crack into it, and it'll register who they are or as much information about them as they can. And they'll waste a lot of their time going for that rather than where your information is. So this is an evolution of that. And what it is basically the idea is when they crack into you, the system realizes that they're not who they're supposed to be, and it gives them a set of information that's really, really close to what the actual information is, but not quite. So it's unusable, and they can crack in as many times as they want. And even if they were to successfully do it once, they've got so much other crap that's almost exactly the same. They wouldn't realize it was theirs even. So that they had the right thing, and so it's. The trouble they're obviously having with it is the difficulty of generating information that is so close and yet not usable, and the parameters you need to use for that. But it's been pursued quite heavily because it could be really, really useful, and it's another thing that might happen. It's there was a Finnish company that was looking into it. Internet of Things, obviously, I'm sure you're all acquainted with it. You know, cars, various other items, fridges. They're all now able to deal with code of various kinds. They're going to be very complex, though. It provides quite a number of problems for encryption and protecting them, because they're obviously going to be very, very heavily scrutinized. Like things like your car, if someone gets hacked and driven off the road, it's going to be all over the front pages, and not something a company wants to deal with. And so there's a large amount of effort going into that. Nothing's been revealed really as to exactly what they're going to do about it, but it's to be watched. A lot of people think blockchain technology is going to be used to protect that sort of stuff because it's so difficult to crack into, but it's yet to be confirmed. Obviously, you've got voice biometrics and facial recognition, which is improving all the time, but I mean, it's not really of the future, is it? We sort of have it now, it's just not very good. Because it's data is so ubiquitous now and available on Facebook and stuff that asking for your mother's maiden name isn't really good enough anymore. And for the same premise, actually, you'll find that tokenization is well and truly taking off actually in financial institutions, because the idea is that all your banking details, they get sent away too many times. You get the GDPR systems coming in to try and curtail how badly business use it, but even you got hotels who are getting cracked all the time because the safety with a large number of companies isn't sufficient. So the idea is to develop a system whereby you can have tokenization, so therefore you can have a token that represents everything that you are financially, but hasn't got your financial details, that can then be connected to your financial details when necessary, so that it can be shared around without risk. But it has to be said, the last and final element of is neural networks are strongly thought to be the future along with machine learning of encryption, in that Google's been working with them to see if you can have an AI develop its own encryption system without any aid at all. And they used 3 of them, one of them trying to guess what the other 2 were sending, and they found that they naturally built up their own, which was actually they could have been a bit more robust actually with their investigation, because it would be more interesting if they'd done studies into how close or how far away the machines were from us and how we do our encryption, to see if we're missing items that could massively improve how we do things. But they haven't done that yet. So that's, again, on the to-do list. But they found that they are capable of developing their own encryption, and therefore you could have individualized encryption for a given AI, and that is absolutely able to be done now at the lowest level. And so all it takes is, and it will say, how fast technology is, Morse doctrine, we'll say another 5 years before that will be absolutely possible to do. But the problem you've got with that, actually, is black box crypto systems bring in something that it was talked about at a crypto conference in the 1990s, but nobody really took it too seriously because it wasn't really much of a thing then. And it's not many people are giving it much credence, actually, but I believe it's going to come into play. And it's kleptography. The guys who suggested it in the 1990s, they brought in, it's a setup, they called it, secretly embedded trapdoor with universal protection. And if you want to have a little experiment with how it works, they've got a thing called JCrypTool, or there's a cryptool as well, and that will show you exactly how it does it. And basically the idea is it's a totally safe way to crack into system, as it were, and influence a black box system. And because you don't know how it comes up with its cryptography, because it's black box, it's very difficult to know how it's been influenced particularly. And the only thing you can get is because it runs on asymmetric encryption based methodology, the only thing you'll ever be able to get from it at the end of the day is the public key. So if you, as a criminal, successfully implement it onto a black box system, you are laughing because you are scot-free and you can do whatever you want, because once you've implemented your own influence onto the cryptographic system, you can therefore crack in and crack like whenever you want, because you've implemented a flaw into their system, basically, in a way. And I think that's going to come up in the future dramatically. More than it is now, because it's not really something that businesses consider at the moment. They're more focused on what we focus on now, which is endpoint sort of cracking. And so I think because technology continues to, it's just basically a big arms race, isn't it? People trying to crack in, trying sort of outsmart people who are trying to build up the defences, and it's constantly trying to one up each other. I think once endpoints have been thoroughly protected, I think it's going to be the next sort of area to concentrate on, particularly seeing as AI seems to be coming to the fore in encryption, and it's going to be a solid way of going forward for any penetration testers or just black hat hackers who are amongst you. Yeah, so thank you very much for listening. I do apologise if it was a bit rambly. And I'll leave you with a joke. A poor joke, but you know what? It's encryption, you take what you can get.
Any questions?
Yeah, any questions?
Can you use these as a password?
It's not advisable because obviously it's well, I mean, at least it goes above 8 characters, so you're not going to have the in hashes and analysis. You can immediately see if something's less than 8, and obviously it's something to focus on. So in that way, it's okay, but it's not got any capitals, not got any numbers. You know the drill yourself. So
Securest guy's network call out Wi-Fi calls.
yeah, they're not great actually. I know somebody who works at Cisco. Take that one off there, please. You heard nothing. Any other questions? No? It's either really good or really bad. So, yeah, it could be worse. Cheers.